there. Senator Wright, we'll go to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have questions in relation to independent public schools.
Sure.
So the Minister originally said that every state but South Australia had signed up, but state and territory governments since have contradicted that claim. Can you clarify for me, please, which states have signed up to be part of the Independent Public Schools Initiative?
So, Senator, I guess part of this is clarification. The Minister went to the November meeting of Standing Council last year and invited all states and territories to express interest in participating in the Independent Public School Initiative. He then wrote to them and invited that participation and asked states and territories to write back to him by the 20th December last year. Every state and territory has written back to the Minister and expressed interest to participate or otherwise. Every state and territory other than South Australia have indicated in writing that they would like to work with the Commonwealth to participate in the Independent Public School Initiative, and that means working with the Department and the Minister around what that would look like for their state. South Australia is the only state that didn't definitively indicate that. They sought further advice around the Independent Public School Initiative, which has been provided to South Australia.
All right, so since then we've actually had statements from the New South Wales Education Minister not supporting the idea of going down the independent schools track, is my understanding. Is that, do you have a different view about what's happened recently?
Well, New South Wales already has its own independent autonomous schools approach, so I don't think they would think it correct to say they don't have an autonomous school approach.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they are speaking publicly, distancing themselves from the Independent Schools Initiative announced by Minister Pyne. That's a different thing to say, that they are not necessarily in favour of some autonomy in schools.
I'm sorry, Senator. It's hard to comment on those public statements. Suffice for us to say, we've had no further advice beyond that Minister's letter, which did express interest in joining in the Independent Public Schools Initiative.
Thank you. How does the government intend to reach its target of 1,500 independent public schools? I'm going to say IPS from now on, it's a bit quicker. By 2017, if, as reported, New South Wales, as Australia's most populous state, will apparently not participate in this particular initiative. Western Australia already has independent public schools in place, and Victoria's schools are already highly autonomous. So how is the 1,500 schools going to be met?
Sure. Well, of course, this is Commonwealth only money. So, you know, if a state chooses not to accept Commonwealth money, then that's a matter for them. Suffice to say, we've already, you know, so far, every state other than South Australia, which simply hasn't given final advisings, has indicated an interest in participating. But my expectation would be that if, say, a state ultimately, well, if it changed its mind and decided not to participate, because as I say, all our indications so far are that they want to, then presumably we could seek to distribute the money to other states. So, you know, it is the intention. It's a voluntary offer. When, you know, the Commonwealth isn't forcing independent public schools on states. It's the Commonwealth only money. The states don't have to match it. So if you know, if a state government wants to make that amount of money available to its schools for these purposes, they can. If they don't wish to, then their schools miss out and someone else's probably gain.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the question I had then was how the funding will be distributed. Is there anything more clear than what you've already said, and what monitoring or accountability measures are in place in relation to that? Because if the target is 1,500 schools, a significant number by 2017, presumably plans are already being made apace to get that out there and to do it. So how will it be distributed, and what accountability and monitoring measures will be in place?
So, Senator, that's the work that we're in the process of doing with states and territories immediately. Some states and territories have already let us know what some of their plans are in relation to how they'd like to participate in the program. We're in the process now of finalising what the agreement structure would look like, consulting with states and territories in relation to that. Those states and territories indicate they won't participate. That will include things like what are the sort of targets, what are the sort of measures that we'll be looking at in relation to that. We certainly have payments to make this financial year. We will make those payments this financial year, and then the remaining payments, as you know, go over the forward estimates. In terms of the funding per state...
Can I just clarify, by this financial year you mean by
June.
30 June?
That's right. That's right. So we have $10 million that we'll be paying by 30th of June. We haven't yet finalised dollar amounts per state and territory because we're still negotiating with them. We could do a simple cut of sort of per population, which is a standard sort of way, but we also want to go quite deeply into the sort of proposals that states and territories are also suggesting. So even though you talk about Victoria having very autonomous schools, Victoria have been speaking to us about taking things further in relation to their autonomy, and particularly around providing additional support to their school councils about how to participate in school processes, around school council governance, the sort of training programs that I think the Minister indicated when he launched this program that this money could very much be used for. So they're the sort of things that we're working through with states and territories.
What criteria will be used to assess which schools can become independent public schools?
Well, that's a decision for the state territories.
So
basically.
the Commonwealth doesn't have any intention of having any input into that?
So we've been, I think the Minister was clear in the correspondence he provided to states and territories that, and I think we've said this a number of times, possibly at the last hearing, and as you well know, states and territories are at different levels in terms of their autonomy. So how states and territories develop their plan, obviously we'll consult with that, and obviously the Minister needs to agree with that in terms of what the state plan will be for Commonwealth money to flow. But the Commonwealth doesn't have a role in actually deciding which schools participate, although I would anticipate we'll probably have a list of those schools. The state would probably give us that listing when they make that decision.
But I would have thought, with respect, I would have thought, given that this seems to be, the Minister seems to be very, very keen on this idea, he would have had some criteria or some, it doesn't make sense to me that he would say just have the money and just do with it what you want. Presumably he has a criteria that he would apply.
Yes,
and he's already provided that to states
So-
and territories.
Yeah.
So what is that? What is that criteria? How would you decide between a school? It's not going to be every school, is it?
Sure, there's five
I'm trying to
main-
clarify the question, really.
That's fine. There's 5 main areas, and I think Mr Cook can go through those.
So the Minister has spoken to all of his state and territory counterparts, both face-to-face but also in writing, in relation to those 5 areas, of the 5 principles that we talk about in terms of independent public schools. So we would be looking at schools participating where they can show that they're working on increasing local governance and parental involvement, where they're being able to demonstrate greater accountability to parents and the local community, whether that be through particular compacts between the school and their local school community or their council, which is common in some states and territories. They're the sort of things that we'd be talking about in that space. Implementing one-line budgets or streamlined budgets so that there's less focus on tying funding and telling schools that they must use their funds for one particular purpose and one particular purpose only, which, can I say, was when I was in a school, we were still required to do at points. So this money is only for art, for example, and you can only spend it on art. Some of those things would still exist in some systems. Increased local management of school facilities and infrastructure would be the 4th one. So giving school communities and principals greater say over their facilities and their capital works and the work that they do in that space. And the last one would be increased delegation over staffing. And each state and territory is in quite a different space in relation to that. And again, the Minister's been quite clear about that in his letter to state and territory ministers, that flexibility around implementation of those 5 areas would be something that he would certainly consider in relation to what New South Wales would do, which may be different to what Queensland would do in some of those areas. But they're the 5 principles, and they're the 5 areas that we'd be looking in terms of assessing the participation and also the progress of states and territories in this initiative.
So I'm trying to make sense of that. They talk, that's, a lot of those are within the state system power, not the individual school. So, for instance, the way a state authority requires budgeting to be done is not within the school's power, that's actually a systemic thing. So if that's across the government sector, that's going to be presumably the same for all schools. So I'm just interested in what criteria for an individual school would be. Would it be student numbers? Would it be size? Would there be any criteria like that would be
Well, that would be a matter for the state and territory more.
So the Minister doesn't have any particular view about that?
Well, his view is based on the 5 principles. He'd want to see the submission that's come back from states and territories about how they've selected those schools, how those 5 principles are reflected in that selection, and also how those 5 principles will actually be achieved in terms of the money that's being allocated to those states and territories for their schools.
Thank you. Chair, I'd actually say I have a few more questions on this. I do note that the estimates are about getting information out, and we've had significant amounts of time from two of the government senators.
I just try and make sure we've got a balance.
I understand that, but we did hear a re-litigation of Gonski, and this is new information that I think the public's entitled to know about. People are wondering how this independent schools initiative will be railed out. I would like to ask a few more questions on it.
A couple more minutes be fine, then I'll go to Senator O'Neill.
Thank you.
Great.
So what are the implications for the IPS initiative for schools who are already highly independent, such as those in the Empowering Local Schools National Partnership?
Sorry, the implications, did you ask?
Yeah, how does it work with those schools that are already highly independent? Would they...
Well, that will depend on the state and territory in terms of the proposal that they develop with the Commonwealth. I used Victoria as the example before. Victoria is seen as being one of the most highly devolved systems in Australia. Yet the Victorian government has written to us outlining, I think, 6 or 7 areas where they'd actually like to focus on. And hopefully by next estimates, hopefully when those agreements have been finalised between the state and the Commonwealth, we can certainly go into some of those areas.
Is the federal government's IPS fund designed to replace some of the state's allocations for the purposes of independent public schools, or will that money supplement allocations that some states have already committed to?
It would certainly be, on my understanding, it would be supplementation. I can't imagine it would be
You'd
a
hope
replacement.
so. You'd hope so.
I think states and territories
I didn't
have already
catch what you said, Ms Paul.
You'd hope so. You'd hope so. You need to be a supplement. Yeah, it's a supplementary program. It's not a replacement program.
Right. When you say you'd hope so, I'm not sure who you're talking about. The you would be in that case. Would it
I
be
beg your
the
pardon. Beg your pardon.
So it will be a supplement,
Yes,
and
that's
not a replacement.
That's right.
All right. The Minister has stated there is evidence that independent public schools lift student performance. Where's that evidence to be found?
So there's a range of evidence, Senator, which I'm happy to provide on notice, so I can go through it in quite detail
if you
here.
provide it
like.
on notice, I think many people are interested to know where that evidence is. It's certainly contested.
I think we've talked about, as often with research, there are competing views, but in relation to this, both OECD, World Bank, United Kingdom, in terms of some of the government reports around what they saw in relation to giving schools greater flexibility on teacher choice, but also curriculum development as well. Melbourne Graduate School of Education did some work around independent public schools, certainly very strong anecdotal feedback from principals as well, saying that it's made a significant difference in terms of the quality of the work they're able to do with their teachers.
Yes, although they didn't actually find that there was a significant difference that was shown in student achievement, if I understand.
Well, the evaluation is very early in the program, Senator.
That report, I understand. So perhaps if you put it on notice, all the evidence.
But in relation to
there,
that report was very clear in the fact that communities and principals.
Yes, you've referred to that anecdotal evidence before, but I'm interested in statistically significant evidence that indicates an increase in student performance.
It would be difficult to find that after 12 months of a program.
Well, I'm talking generally. There's also international studies as well, which also actually do not support the view that, in fact, there's real changes in. That's my understanding. But if there's other evidence,
oh yes,
I'd be
there's
really
significant
interested
amounts.
to know it.
OECD, World Bank, many independent reports
All right, well,
have indicated that.
You provide that would be helpful. Thank you, because I know it is a contested area. In terms of the school's funding, the state governments and Catholic systems have their own models for distributing the Commonwealth's contribution of funds under the Australian Education Act now. I'm interested to know, do the systems provide the department with their funding distribution plans? And if so, do you have the figures on a school-by-school basis? And what are the figures? And maybe you could take that on notice, given that we're running out of time. And if not, how will the Commonwealth be able to ascertain that the funds are being spent appropriately?
So, Senator, we don't, and we never have.
Right.
But it's public information through the My School website. So we know exactly how much information every school gets from the Commonwealth. and also from the state and territory.
How much
funding?
funding? How much
Funding.
information or how much
Sorry,
funding?
did I say
Funding.
funding I meant, so
That's
that...
right. No, I thought that's what you meant. I
Yeah,
just
sorry,
wanted to
my
know. No,
apologies.
that's right. I'm not taking a point on it. I just wanted to make sure that's what you meant.
Thanks, Senator Wright.
All right. So
Appreciate your...
I'm sorry, that answer. So we need to look at the My Schools website, and that's how we know the money can be spent appropriately.
That's
That's
where it
always
will
been
be
the case,
shown.
that's
Yes,
correct.
that's right.